Here's your host, consultant, and financial planner, Adam Koch.
All right, everybody. Today we've got Robb Christenson and Chuck Nauman from Peerless Search joining me. Robb, Chuck, and their third partner in the trio, Sean Turner, who won't be joining us today, by the way. The three of these guys joined forces to create Peerless Search Partners 5 years ago, or should I say, just a year before COVID in 2019. Not an easy time to start. But together they built an incredibly successful recruiting company based on a multitude of trusted relationships and their years of industry experience, as well as their ability to be quick, accurate, and multifaceted, something that truly separates them from their competition in the recruiting arena. What I find interesting, though, is that each of them come to the table with their own specialties. Robb started his career in 2006 with a Fortune 500 company and has an extensive background in finding the next big move for anybody from CEOs and executives all the way to the new grads looking for their first big opportunity. Chuck, on the other hand, has more than 15 years of recruiting experience, starting with a national recruiting firm back in 2005, and his focus lies in the areas of executives, senior staff, consulting, and staff augmentation solutions. And if there's one word that I could use to describe them when it comes to their approach to working with companies and candidates, it's authenticity, and I mean that wholeheartedly. So put your learning caps on and enjoy my conversation with Robb Christenson and Chuck Nauman. All right, everybody, I got Robb Christenson and Chuck Nauman at Peerless Search. Thank you guys so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
For sure. Okay, so we talked a little bit ago. This was probably maybe a couple of years ago. Robb, it was just you and I think, that time. And a lot's changed since 2020 in the post-COVID world where, God, I can't believe it's almost 4.5 years now since all that craziness went down. But while things have changed, I think that there's still a lot of problems that companies are facing in the hiring world. You know, they're having a hard time finding talent. They're having a hard time competing with their competitors, winning that talent, keeping talent. So why don't we just jump into the meat of the conversation here right away and start talking about, how to get talent in the door first and foremost. So whoever wants to take this first, if you guys want to trade off back and forth, totally up to you. But first question I have is, what are the most effective ways that companies can attract talent in this ridiculously competitive job market, especially for companies that maybe not everybody has a huge recruiting budget?
I'll chime in on this one. I'd say first and foremost, as you said, the recruiting budget itself, you got to look at the hiring trends and making sure that you understand what the compensation piece, the package might look like in the market, as well as what you've got budgeted for. More times than not, we see where you've got candidates that come in, they go through the interview, and then all of a sudden they're $10,000 more than what they can actually pay for it. So
wow.
I always tell my clients a good resource to go look at for that is Indeed.com. That you can go in there and put in what your job title is, and then what your location is, and it'll spit out a nice range of what you can look at. That way, you at least know whether you're in the market or not.
Okay, that makes sense. It's almost like before you even start the hiring process, make sure you can afford it, right?
Right.
Or otherwise, you're not going to get any candidates if you're not offering enough, I guess. How can companies these days differentiate themselves in the posting itself? So when they actually go and they throw their posting online, how do they structure it in a way that attracts candidates that are aligned with what they're looking for?
So if we're referencing the body of the post itself, Chuck just hit on the number one thing, and I think the statistic is like 91% of respondents want to see that salary information in there. And yes, you do want to make sure it's competitive. Be succinct. I think the job postings that go on and on and on and list every single bullet point, like that's not necessarily going to get people excited. So you want to tell that story. You want to tell that story briefly in these postings.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously list the comp information. But I think it's also about, the outlets that you get those to too. Like, are you just posting and praying? Is it one job and then you're like, let's now play the waiting game kind of thing? Or are you posting it, hitting up all your different, whatever social media, outlets that you use? Are you posting out there? Do you have people within your company that are broadcasting this out there? Like, do you really get it out to the masses? I think far too often we see the former of what I described there, where it's just post, wait, and then hope that the respondents will find you. You need to get that out there more. So I don't think people utilize that enough in terms of utilizing the people in their company to post jobs.
Is that something that you two recommend as part of your working with clients that are looking to hire, like helping them to work with their staff to engage and share those opportunities as opposed to having the owner doing all the work or the HR team?
I just want to make sure, are we helping them with the job posting
Not
itself?
helping them, but recommending that. I mean, is that something? Because that's something that makes a lot of sense to me. If you've got a company, and let's just say it's a smaller company of 40 people, 40 employees, if you've got one HR person or one person who's kind of, I don't know, maybe two people in charge of the, creating the job description, putting posts out there on LinkedIn, Indeed, as you mentioned, Chuck, is I guess I'd never thought about the idea of saying, hey, now let's get some of our staff sharing that information. So it's not just coming from the LinkedIn company page or from the owner, him or herself. It's really kind of being, I don't want to say flooded, because maybe that's maybe, or maybe that's the question I'm asking. Maybe is asking your staff to help out and share this job amongst their network, is that asking too much? Is it diluting the whole search process, or I don't know, am I way off?
If I understand your question correctly, I think by the time you said, what do we do with our clients and what do we tell them? I think by the time they come to us, they've already tried most of those things. They've posted something themselves. And at this point, they're looking to us to go find talent they can't find themselves.
Got it. Okay.
But that could be a best practice before you reach out to a third-party recruiter, is to, go on and utilize LinkedIn as much as you possibly can. Utilize your own network, who you might know.
Almost like a diagnostics for a company though too. So I'm happy to talk to any organization that we're working with and look at their, talent solutions in general in terms of what they're doing out there. So, you just brought up one that we talked about, like, as what have you done to date? How have you tried to bring people in the door? Let's look at that. Let's look at the job posting. Is it written correctly? Is it reaching the right audience? How are you utilizing social media? Like all these things that we could keep going in terms of, are you doing all these things? You might still do all those. You might have everything right, and you still need to utilize someone like us. And I think that's another thing we look at too is, what other partnerships do you have going on? And have you tapped into those? And that's very specific in terms of industry. So I'll save all that. But, I think the shorter answer is when we work with companies, we try to help them holistically. Like they're bringing the best talent in the door, and we're happy to do so.
Okay. No, that makes sense. What about social media? So speaking of labor intensive, it seems like something that can be tough to do. So, I mean, how can companies use this different types of social media that's out there to attract talent without becoming so resource heavy? Are there any tools or strategies you two recommend?
You want me to chime in on this one, Chuck?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll go back and forth.
I'll go on this one here. So I think there's a bit of a misnomer with social media, in that you have to have, full-time marketing person that's dedicated to that, or or that it costs money. And especially for these small to mid-sized companies, like, use it. There's postings that you can do for free. So a couple of things I would say with this. One, you have to know your audience. We focus on finance, accounting, IT, primarily office jobs in general. I don't think anybody wants to see Chuck Nauman or Robb Christenson dancing on a TikTok video to bring professionals in the door, right?
Yeah, maybe I haven't seen you dance yet.
Stay tuned afterward. There's more
bonus material.
But so I think understand like the audience that you're trying to reach, and then the social media that you need to use to reach them. So we use LinkedIn a lot. That's where our audience resides. There's different companies that might want to use Indeed, like Chuck mentioned, or Facebook, whatever. We could keep going down the list. You know where your audience resides. In terms of getting stuff out there, you got to post way more than you think. I think we were talking about this a little bit, like before we got going. Like people think that you can post one time and you're done, either with a job posting or just social media, and that's just not how that works. You have to get that out there all the time, and it's constantly posting about your job and making sure that that's at the top of a feed. That it's you're posting as a company all the time, getting your messaging out there. Like I think you have to do it way more than you think.
That's interesting. I would. Yeah, I guess it probably gets buried if you do it once or twice and that's it.
Yeah. And again, I'm not a marketing person. I don't know the algorithms and how that work, but we've been advised on this kind of stuff too. And yeah, I think we all think about how we, look at our phone and what shows up, and yeah, it's got to get out there quite a bit. And again, I think that messaging, it should be enough to, I'm getting a little bit repetitive here, but you want to make sure that what you're saying is sending clear communication in terms of here's what we are, here's what we embody, and here's what here's what we're looking for.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. We've talked about what to do. What about what not to do? So what are mistakes you're seeing companies make that are, where they're getting in their own way basically when they're trying to attack talent?
Well, I'd say from a posting standpoint, start with what most companies do is they post the job description, and that's all it is. It's just the job description itself. It's we need X, Y, and Z, and here's what your responsibilities will be. And it's pretty generic, as opposed to telling your story, kind of like what the theme of this kind of has
Yeah,
been
what do
in
you
the
mean
last.
by that, by the way? I was going to ask earlier, and I didn't want to go on a too big of a tangent here, but what does that mean when you say telling your story? You mentioned that twice now, and then we meant to talk
Yeah.
about it off air. I don't know what that means.
So tell a little bit about your company. There's got to be a quote unquote a hook. You're essentially selling yourself. You're selling the company. What's the hook that's going to say, why would I want to take a look at this job description anymore? Why would I want to apply to it outside of that? I'm a IT developer or a controller or whatever it might be, and I can do this job. As opposed to, we're a startup company that is grown by, twofold, for the last 3 years, and, we're rapidly expanding, whatever it might be. You got to give them something to kind of go off of and tell them why they may want to learn more about the company. It doesn't have to be, a big paragraph of it, but, at least something that gives them a hook to come into it.
I got you. Okay. Anything else they shouldn't be doing that they are, like, I guess, common mistakes you see?
You want me to go on that one? I think,
Yeah.
I mean, along those lines, when we talk about telling that story, you do have to tell it quickly. Like this shouldn't be a soliloquy about all the long 10 minute version of Libertas or Peerless. So like, okay, get to your point on these kind of things. Chuck hit the number one. We see this all the time, is that like we see in these job postings that it is very vanilla. It is just here's the job, come apply. And that's hard to get excited for. It's hard to stand out from everything else. So I think having that in there, and then the salary information has to be in there. Some of this stuff we've covered already, but that knowing your market though in terms of salary is really important. So I can't name a company, or name the company, but we just had this conversation the other day where we're dealing with one, and they were, I mean, they weren't even in the ballpark of what they were looking for. It was like a kitchen sink job description, one of the world, and then, hey, come work for us for peanuts.
Huh.
Like, they're just not being realistic. So I think you need to know that before you put that out there, because the downside of that is people are going to see that comp information. They're going to see that they're significantly below market, and they're going to remember that. So I think you need to be wise about what you're putting out there. I would also be mindful of taking down job posts. This is a big complaint that comes up, especially on LinkedIn, where those jobs will roll over, and you'll see it, and they'll have like 10,000 applicants or whatever. It's because it's been out there forever, and so people lose interest in those types of companies, those types of job postings. We hear it all the time when we talk to people. They're like, "Yeah, I feel like I've seen that job out there for months now." Not a good look for your company. So I think you need to get these things out there, make sure your TA group, your talent acquisition group is on top of it, getting responding to people, and then pulling that job. You do not want to have that out there probably more than 30 days.
You might be, if you're a candidate and you see a job that's been out there for 7 months with 10,000 applicants, you're probably thinking, there's no way I'm getting this job.
Right. Excited?
And some of those platforms show how many applicants there are. So yeah, they can definitely see that, and they're like, all right, what's the point?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about structuring the search. So, how do you structure a talent search that ensures you're finding the right candidates from the very beginning?
So I would say the number one thing that companies need to learn how to do is figure out who their hiring team is going to be per job. Identify who those players are, what their roles are, make sure that everybody knows what the job description is, what the roles and responsibilities are, and that they're in agreement with what the must-haves versus the nice-to-haves are. A lot of times, as we work with our clients, they'll go through the interview process and they're like, well, this guy really liked this person, this guy really liked that person, but there's a conflict of what they liked about them, or what was different. So, having a meeting, just a simple meeting to lay out what the search is going to look like and actually look at it as though it's a search and not like we've got to fill this job. It's an
Okay.
actual search. You're searching for the right person that's going to be a long-term fit for it. So have that hiring team ready to go and understand what the must-haves are, the must skills are versus the nice-to-have skills are.
And I think one of you earlier when we were off air, we were talking about authenticity, and I really loved that. And I'm not sure if we talked about that on air or not, but can either of you speak to the whole concept of being honest and forthright and being real, essentially, and part of telling your story, who you are, who you're not?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I say to people when I'm preparing them for an interview is, you want to ask about a company's challenges, but better yet, I hope that these companies actually bring that up on their own. I don't know too many organizations or good organizations that don't recognize the challenges of the headwinds that they face. And I think healthy ones discuss it in the interview process. Here's what
Absolutely.
we're doing right. Here's some of the challenges that we're facing right now. Here's what we're trying to do to take on those challenges. And how do you fit into that? And so I think that kind of goes in with that authenticity or candor. Talk freely about that kind of stuff. Obviously, you don't want to be like, if you've had a lot of turnover, you don't want to be dogging your previous staff. Like that's probably not a good look either. But I think just taking ownership of what has gone wrong, or maybe that's too negative, but what's not working the way you'd like it to today, and then also what's working too. Like just understand what you have going on and share that story with people in the interview.
Once you start going through these interviews and companies are, you know, implementing their hiring process, how do you keep candidates engaged, especially if you're a company that's got a really, really long interview cycle?
Yeah. We've got a few of those clients.
We're both already there.
And I would say that's one thing that we kind of do well. And I would say any potential employer needs to just reach out to them often and keep them engaged and let them know what's going on. It kind of goes with that authenticity. Just the be truthful with what the process is. Hey, especially in the summertime, for instance, so things tend to go to a crawl. And it just everything drags out because somebody's on vacation, the hiring team's on vacation, or whatever it might be. Candidate can be on vacation as well. But just reaching out to them and letting them know you haven't forgotten about them and letting them know where they are, where you are with the search, and being open and honest. Hey, we've got another couple of weeks before we're probably going to make a decision. And then asking them, what does that do for you? Do you have another potential offer coming up? Or, and I think just too many times clients and potential employers look at this as like we're the only shop in town, as opposed to there's a stiff competition out there for them.
Yeah, almost like they deserve it or it's easy. It's not, obviously. Speaking of, um, I'm sure there's lots of companies that get frustrated with the process. They've tried everything, at least they think they have. At what point should they start looking out for, a peerless search for a team like the two of you? I know you have another partner, Sean, as well up in Cleveland, but when should companies start looking to work with external recruiters like the two of you, agencies, and what's the best way to work together in a way that results in the highest success rate possible? Because that's probably a concern people have, right up front. Is this going to work?
Yeah, right away. So we do a lot of what's called contingent searches, and I'll spare everyone here the recruiting industry vernacular kind of thing. But when you're working on a contingent search anyway, you're not paying us anything. So what I'll often tell our clients is, let us show you the best talent that we have and benchmark it versus what you're going to see on your own. Obviously, if you could fill it on your own, then there's no need for us. So conduct your job search, do whatever you're going to do. Hopefully, we're bringing you talent that you're not otherwise going to find. That is our job, is to be constantly pipelined, to be talking to people all the time, even when you're not. You might look for a role, whatever it is, XYZ position within your organization, one time every couple of years. Chances are we're talking to those people 3, 4, 5, and so on times a week.
Wow.
So that is our job, is to be pipelined and to bring this talent to you that you won't find through the job postings and through all the mechanisms we just mentioned earlier. So, people wait. Chuck hit on it earlier that often they've kind of thrown their hands up in the air and they're like, can't find it now. It's time to call. No, get us engaged right away, because we can walk through different strategies, not only for how we're going to go about it, but things that you can take too. I talk about recruiting holistically. Like I'm okay with, like, we don't have any like magic tricks here. I'm happy to share with what we do and how we go about things. If they can incorporate it in their own recruiting game, so be it.
Okay. Yeah. And then what about ways that they can improve the experience that the candidates, the candidate experience, from the second that they show up, and in the form of a resume, throughout the final decision.
Man, it is, Adam, it is the number one thing that I think is outside of maybe comp. We'll say 1 and 1A that are just crushing companies in their searches right now. It's time. Like they don't respond quick enough. And then there's big gaps after they do contact them. Larger companies and even mid-sized companies rely too much on their talent acquisition and automation. So they send out these canned email responses that people, find me one person that thinks those things are great. One. Everybody hates them. Like it's the coldest way you can go about recruiting. So whether you're telling somebody you're interested or they're out, like either way, it stinks. You're not talking to anybody. So if you have a talent acquisition group, you have an HR person, heck, even if you're the hiring manager, get your hands dirty. It's time to get in there, contact these people, identify a timeline, and stick to that timeline.
There you go.
Chuck talked about summer. Sorry, I'm getting on a bit of a rant here, aren't I? Like
I like rants. This is where it gets fun.
This.
But like, yeah, like the summer months are brutal. Okay, like we know vacations happen, then just own that. Like when you start talking to people, share that timeline with them right from the get-go. But when you're contacting people, you should be in constant communication. That time, like probably the shorter answer to your question, Adam, I would say the frequency needs to be once a week, once every couple of weeks. And we'll often share, I think the phrasing I use for a lot of people is, hey, I want you to contact me, a week from now, even if my update is I don't have one, I'd still rather share that than leave you in the dark.
Okay. Yeah. So just a touch base, even if there's nothing to say.
Exactly. So at least they know that we're on it. And I think companies should be doing the same thing. Like, hey, no movement. Here's where we sit. Just give a quick update. It doesn't have to be like a lengthy 20-minute conversation. Just something so they know that this company is still thinking about you.
So it sounds like we're talking about making this maybe a little bit more personable is the word. How can companies make the interview process more, I guess, candidate friendly in general, aside from just this? I mean, they want to be thorough, right? I mean, every company wants to be as thorough as possible and they want to find the right fit. But are there any other tips you have on making it more candidate friendly other than just, keeping in touch a little bit more frequently, even if there's nothing else to say? Is there anything else they can do?
You certainly don't want to sacrifice quality for speed or speed for quality. I think it's a culmination of everything we just talked about. Making sure you stay in touch with them, making sure that you've got a good job description out there from the get-go, and pulling it down when you've got enough candidates that you think are qualified to review, and then keeping your 5 or 6 best candidates in through the process, texting them, calling them, whatever it might be, keeping them informed.
What about when people are not a good fit? I mean, that's got to be, I don't know, a little bit awkward, I guess. I'm coming from the place where I own a couple businesses where, we don't hire a lot and we don't fire a lot either. And when we're hiring somebody, one of the toughest things to do, I guess, is to tell somebody, hey, it didn't work out. So how do you keep in touch with somebody that maybe it didn't work out this time, maybe it was the wrong seat on the bus, whatever the reason was? How do you recommend companies stay in touch with these candidates who might not be selected right away, but they might be a good fit in the future?
I think it's just that. I think it's just sharing with them, here's what went down. And we talked about authenticity, transparency, candor, however you want to phrase that. Like, I think as much as you can. Now that I will say this, I'm going to preface it with saying we're not human resources. We're not a company's legal department. And sometimes that's easier said than done, that you can only say so much. And I get all the legality behind that and why. But, if you can have a personal conversation with somebody, especially someone that you like, when it's a hard decision, you say, look, we liked him. We'd like to continue to stay in touch. And then actually do that. Actually stay in touch with them throughout. Like everybody says that. Now it's actually the execution part. Are you going to call that person, a couple of months? Are you going to check in with them periodically? Like, I think those types of things. It's nothing's foolproof, but boy, we've seen it before. where that person that was, second place or whatever comes back around and then they end up being a great hire down the road. It happens all the time.
It sounds like it's probably better to not say you want to stay in touch at all than it is to say you want to and then you just totally blow up your integrity and not do it.
Yeah, I guess. I think I would just be as honest as you can with them. And then, just, you don't have to say, we should continue, just because it might just be one of those blow off phrases that everybody gives, it's not you, it's me. And stuff I stay in touch.
Not you, it's me. Yeah. It's like dating.
Yeah, I think, you just.
In many ways, it is like dating.
What's that?
I said in many ways, it is like dating. You don't ever want to tell somebody no.
Right.
So much today with just social media where it's easy to send a LinkedIn note to somebody. These don't have to be formal sit down conversations. Checking in periodically, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Oh, what about do's and don'ts? So let's talk about, I know we've done a little bit of that specifically with different, areas within a hiring process, but what are just in general some common do's and don'ts when it comes to attracting or engaging with candidates?
Probably going to hear me repeat myself here a little bit, but there's a common theme to this. It's in my opinion, the big do, talk about compensation early on in the process. Don't waste everybody's time getting through 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks worth of interviews, only for it to come out, washed out like that.
And is there any reason why any company would not want to post compensation on their job posting?
Smaller companies are probably, they might have another employee get in there and be able to kind of gauge what that looks like. Larger companies probably aren't going to have that big of a problem because they have salary bands.
But in general, it's kind of a rule of thumb you're saying is that too many people don't do it, but almost everybody should be. Is that accurate?
I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah. The data shows that prospective candidates want to see it. Again, I think it's something like 91% want to see it. It's a really high number. Don't hold me to that exactly, but it's pretty high.
Big. Yeah.
The job postings get far greater responses when you have it. But Chuck brings up a really good point. If you have running into internal equity, things within a company or issues, then it's difficult to post that kind of stuff out there. And one more thing on compensation. When you're getting to the offer stage, Chuck mentioned, talking about salary early and often. Couldn't agree more. I know Chuck's going to grin when I say this. We've gotten to the finish line and it's been we've had this conversation 10 times. They're like, well, we'd like to offer them $5,000 less than they're making today. You got to be bleeping kidding me. What are you doing? Why are we going through all this? So just be realistic. You're not going to just woo them throughout because you're so damn charming that they've now completely thrown their salary, issues out the door. And it's you know what? I would take $5,000 less to work with them, to work with Adam. I'm willing to do it.
Yeah. Right.
Come on. Make sure that's a competitive offer. And you can't have that conversation enough.
Yeah. I was thinking about getting them Apple TV, but I think I'm just going to, get them a DVD player instead.
Right.
They'll be excited about that.
Yeah, they'll love it.
Yeah. How do companies ensure they're not losing candidates during the interview process because the interview process is poor? And maybe I'm kind of leading you there, but maybe the better question is, what makes the interview, what makes a bad interview process bad?
Companies not knowing what their own process is. Them not having a process. They don't know what that next step looks like. I think I've said this earlier, is we've had clients that we've had first round interviews go out and we're like, okay, they did great. We really like them. Okay, what's the next steps? Well, hold on, I got to go find out. They don't know who that is. So that just exacerbates the situation. It just extends it out way too long.
Yeah,
I think too with smaller companies, sometimes it can be too reliant on one person who may not be the most organized, and then they can create that bottleneck. But just not staying on top of things. And at larger companies, we see this all the time where there's too many cooks in the kitchen type of deal. All right, now they got to talk to, the third person in HR and our second talent acquisition person and the hiring manager, then the direct report. Okay, maybe streamline this a little bit.
Yeah, it's like the board mentality where, you have to have a meeting to have a meeting and make a decision. That can get frustrating, I'm sure. Well,
and people are working, a lot of them are, not everybody's working, but you're when you're asking them to give up their time, and we've seen companies do this where they're like, we'd like to have them come out on site for 3 hours. Well, how many times can you do that? So, I think the more flexible you can be with that too, in terms of working around prospective candidates' schedules, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. What about kind of wrap things up here? What would you say is the thing? And you can each have one if you want, or if you agree on the same one, that's fine. But what would you say is the single biggest problem that you two are seeing in the hiring world today amongst businesses who are trying to attract and retain top talent?
This seems like a Chuck question.
This is a Chuck question?
I'm not sure if I'm going to just continue to repeat myself here, but the single biggest pitfall is having that, not knowing what their process is and not having that compensation nailed down. It just taking way too long. We've had clients where it's taken a month from the start, first interview through the last interview. It's taken a month. And that's probably the biggest pitfall, because we've just lost a candidate here about a week ago due to that. Just not having that process down.
Wow.
Yeah, you take it from this level of excitement to your organization to, I don't care how good you are. A month goes on, and if 6 weeks, and if you haven't spoken to them, like they just naturally lose interest. We've used the dating analogy before. Imagine like a month in between dates. Like, I don't care how excited you are. Like, your month's gone on, you start looking elsewhere, kind of thing.
Forget her name by then.
Right. So
yeah.
The other thing I'd say, Adam, is not enough people use Peerless, obviously. I mean, come on. Like that's definitely a mistake companies.
That's a given right there.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I think that's our time for the day. But we've got more. So if you liked this episode and you want to learn more, first and foremost, we just recorded a webinar yesterday, September 25th. And that's going to be, it was recorded, so it's going to be replayed on YouTube. So head over to the Elevate YouTube page if you want to watch that replay, where Chuck and Robb did more, as opposed to a conversational style. They did a little bit more teaching, we'll call it. So check that out. First of all, it's titled Unlocking Talent, Proven Strategies to Hire and Attract Top Talent. If you'd like to get a hold of Robb or Chuck, you can message them on LinkedIn. You can go check them out at peerless-search.com. That's peerless-search.com. And you'll also find their contact information and other links below in the show notes if you're on YouTube, as well as on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And as I always say, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of podcasts out there, and you chose to give ours a listen today. So thank you so much for joining in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on the Elevate Your Business podcast. To complete our free business valuation quiz, to check out additional articles, webinars, videos, and other educational resources, or to set up an intro call with your host, Adam Koch, just head over to elevateandexit.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for financial advice. None of our shows engage in rendering legal, financial, tax, or other professional services. Always talk to a professional business transition planning consultant or certified exit planning advisor before implementing any of the ideas shared in this episode.